When you think of Venice, what comes to mind? The canals, right? The gondolas, those stunning palaces. But what if I told you that the most powerful, most enduring thing Venice ever built wasn't a building at all? It was a story. The story it told the world about itself.
You see, for 1,000 years, Venice's incredible empire wasn't just built on trade routes and naval power. It was built on a legend, a carefully, brilliantly crafted story about being the perfect society, a beacon of liberty, with a destiny blessed by God himself. And this was the Venetian myth.
And wow, was that story persuasive. They called it La Serenissima, the most serene republic. And for centuries, some of the greatest thinkers in Europe were absolutely convinced it was the most perfect government on the planet. But here's the big question we're asking today. Was it real? Or was it just the best piece of public relations in history? So if you're going to build a myth this big, a story this powerful, where do you even begin? Well, you start right at the beginning, of course. The legend of Venice kicks off with its very foundation, which they claimed was, well, nothing short of divine. And listen to this, every single piece of their origin story was perfectly engineered. First, they said their founders weren't conquerors. They were refugees, people fleeing barbarian invasions just to find freedom. Then, get this, the timing. They claim the city was founded on March 25th, 421, the very day of the Annunciation. I mean, talk about a divine thumbs up. They even threw in that they were descended from the heroes of ancient Troy. But you know what they conveniently left out? Any mention of their early dependence on the Byzantine Empire. The message they were selling was crystal clear. We were born independent, we were chosen by God, and we were always destined for greatness.
So, you've got this incredible foundation myth. What's next? Well, they built on top of it with 3 massive pillars that held up the entire Venetian identity for 1,000 years. Their insane geography, their unique brand of faith, and their supposedly perfect government. Okay, pillar number 1, geography. I mean, just look at Venice. Its very existence seems like a miracle. But the story they told wasn't about simply surviving in this impossible place. Oh no, it was about triumphing over it. I love how the English ambassador Sir Henry Wotton put it back in the day, necessity being the mother of invention. The Venetians portrayed themselves as masters of their world, taming an impossible landscape through sheer genius and a deep love of liberty. So their city wasn't just built on water. It was built on the idea that they could conquer nature itself. All right, on to pillar number 2, faith. And this is an absolute masterclass in political branding. So back in 829, Venetian merchants pull off this legendary heist. They steal the relics of Saint Mark the Evangelist from Alexandria. Now, this wasn't just some holy relic grab. It was a massive political power move. By making Saint Mark their guy, they ditched their old patron saint who was tied to the Byzantine Empire. It was basically a declaration of spiritual independence from Constantinople. So clever. And they didn't stop there. They took it even further. The winged lion of St. Mark became the symbol of the Venetian state itself. And here's the crucial part. The leader of Venice, the Doge, was considered St. Mark's heir on earth. Not a bishop, and definitely not the Pope in Rome. This move cemented Venice's unique autonomy. They were a pious city for sure, but on their own terms, where the state, not the church, always had the final say. And that idea of perfect balance brings us right to pillar number 3. This is probably the most famous part of the whole myth, their political system, the very thing that earned them the name La Serenissima, the most serene republic. So for centuries, you've got thinkers, going all the way back to Aristotle, dreaming about this ideal government called a mixed constitution. The idea was you take the best part of a monarchy, the best of an aristocracy, and the best of a democracy, and you blend them together. Why? To create perfect stability, to avoid tyranny on one side and chaos on the other. And Venice just turns to the rest of the world and says, yeah, that thing you've all been dreaming about, we built it. They have the Doge for the monarchy part, the Senate for the aristocracy, and the Great Council to represent democracy. The result? A state that was supposedly immune to all the civil wars and revolutions that were constantly tearing the rest of Europe apart. And they didn't just talk about it, they showed it off everywhere. Just look at this kind of artwork. You see Venice personified as this powerful goddess. She's being crowned between Mars, the god of war, for their mainland empire, the Stato di Terra, and Neptune, god of the sea, for their massive maritime empire, the Stato di Mar. The message couldn't be clearer. Our rule is perfect, it's balanced, it's just, and it covers everything from the land to the sea. And boy, did this branding campaign work. It was incredibly effective. By the 14th century, you have the famous poet Petrarch writing this about Venice. today the only homeland of liberty, peace, and justice, the only refuge for honest men. I mean, that's not just a local boast. That is the five-star review that shaped how the entire world saw Venice for centuries.
But you know how it goes. No story, no matter how perfect, lasts forever without a challenge. And as Venice grew more and more powerful, a darker reflection began to emerge. A counterstory. The rise of the anti-myth.
And the contrast between the two stories is just night and day. Where the myth saw liberty and justice, the anti-myth saw tyranny and oppression. Where the myth saw harmony and stability, its critics saw a ruthless oligarchy of nobles. The Serene Republic was recast as an aggressive, expansionist empire. And this darker story really started gaining traction in the 15th century, when Venice started aggressively conquering territory on the Italian mainland, and really started to alarm its neighbors.
Yeah, pretty soon, Venice's rivals in Europe stopped buying the story. They weren't seeing a peaceful, ideal republic anymore. What they saw was a greedy, power-hungry empire that needed to be stopped. This black legend of Venice painted a picture of a city run by spies, assassins, and shadowy councils. The absolute polar opposite of that serene image it had spent centuries building.
But here's the truly amazing part. In the long run, even as the real physical city of Venice started to decline in power, the myth, the story, it turned out to be way more powerful and way more resilient than the city itself, casting this incredibly long shadow over history. Think about it. The idea of the perfect Venetian republic became a blueprint for others. It inspired Florentine republicans like Machiavelli. It was held up as a model during England's parliamentary debates in the 1600s. And incredibly, it even traveled across the Atlantic to influence the thinking of America's founding fathers. The story literally outlived the empire. And this brings us to a final thought. Venice built its entire identity on a powerful, compelling story of liberty, justice, and exceptionalism. A story that shaped its destiny and the world around it. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What myths do our own societies live by today?